It is IB Nation Sports Talk, and it is a full house show today. We've got a little of this, we've got a little of that. Ryan Roberts is in the house. Jesse's going to be in the house in a little bit. Salty was behind and put me on the reverse clock, I guess, to get started because he usually puts me on the clock as soon as the clock strikes 6. But Ryan Roberts here to start things off. How are you tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well, Sean. I'm doing well, man. I figure I tune into your show every single night anyway, so I might as well come on to be a guest, I guess, right?
Jump on and be on the show. That's right. Glad to have you. It's been a little while. Well, we don't do a whole lot of recruiting news on this show, and that's why you're here. There's some big news today. 2025 Arizona defensive back Cre Thomas announcing his commitment just within the last 30 minutes or so to the Fighting Irish, the 9th commitment by my count, unless you have a different count, to Notre Dame's 2025 class. So, he chose Notre Dame, committed to Notre Dame over Oregon, Wisconsin, Arizona, among the teams that he turned down. So I'll just ask you right off the top, how big is this for Notre Dame?
I mean, it's a great first step, Sean. It really is. And I'm super happy to be on this show and talk to you because obviously it was a little bit of weird timing with the 5:30 commitment rolling right into your show, right?
Exactly.
So it would have been the timing would have been a little funky, but it's a really great first step because I think there's a lot of layers to the Cre Thomas commitment in general. One is he's a kid that Notre Dame identified as a player that they wanted very early on. He was a part of the Pot of Gold offer events this past St. Patrick's Day, which went out to all the 2025 kids, obviously, that were on their radar. And pretty much from the jump, he was a guy that Notre Dame had kind of circled in on and said, like, that's a guy we want in the class, right? Because he obviously comes from the same high school as Benjamin Morrison, who's now a absolute star for Notre Dame, freshman All-American last year. They're one of the best corners in all of college football. And you continue that pipeline that Brophy Prep is now beginning to build. But more importantly, the player and the young man, I think, is really what separates this commitment for me. One, recruited as a corner. And, I'll get in, I guess, a little bit more as far as like what I like about him on film, because I just dropped a film eval of him on boards.irishbreakdown.com. But he's a 6'1", 175 pounds, zone-based corner that can play a little bit of everything on the back end. But the great thing about him, Sean, is I think when you start to build a class, having a guy that can do a little bit of everything is a great starting point to have, a little bit of versatility on the back end. And Cre Thomas, as a sophomore, was a pure outside corner, a guy that was locking up the best receiver on the opposing team. Junior year comes around. Now he's playing a safety role, and now they're using him in a ton of different ways. He's playing too high. He's playing single high. He's playing man-to-man on slot receivers at times. He is doing everything for Brophy. And now I look at him and I say, if he could last, obviously, as an outside corner, that's where he will probably start his career at Notre Dame more than likely. But he brings a great baseline to the table because he can also play safety. I think he could also play nickel. This is I call him a Swiss Army knife on the message board. Like, this is that type of kid that can do a little bit of everything. You get a player that you wanted out of the state of Arizona, which I think is another big part of it too, because Arizona is a state that is continuing to produce more and more talent each and every year. And I think Cre Thomas is a great starting block to that defensive backfield that Notre Dame's building in 2025, which has a chance to be really good if they close on their guys on their board.
I think it's interesting with the state of Arizona, because it's not a traditional, like, this is where you've got to go to get high-end football talent. But just talking to you and seeing some of the names that you've already mentioned and some other names of former NFL players who are out there, it seems like, it's known as a retirement state, but it seems like a lot of these former NFL guys are kind of planting their roots in Arizona, and their sons are coming up out of there. There's a lot of talent that's starting to build up out there.
Yeah, I mean, Brophy especially, obviously, right, is kind of becoming a little bit of a hotbed because, I mean, I mentioned Benjamin Morrison, obviously, in 2022, and then 2024 with Cre Thomas, who's dad is a college coach. He has some bloodlines as far as some, college players that came through him. But I mean, we were talking before we started, Sean, and like the Kyle Vanden Bosch, who was a all-pro defensive end in the NFL level for the Arizona Cardinals and the Tennessee Titans. He's got twin sons apparently that play at Brophy that I believe are sophomores this year. That apparently are the one kid's a linebacker apparently, and apparently he's a really good football player. Darren Sproles' son apparently is on the team as well. So yeah, man, they got a team of future college football players, that's for sure, over there. And this is a guy that you mentioned, Arizona, right? Like Arizona is a really interesting state because Brian's talked about this a ton. There's been kind of a little bit of a population shift as far as like a lot of people like moving from California out to Arizona, some Texas out to Arizona. Arizona is obviously a beautiful place. So people are kind of, populating that state now. And obviously the more players you have in a state, the more opportunities you have to have a hotbed of talent. And that's what Arizona, I think, is turning into a little bit. And it's really interesting proposition for Notre Dame to Arizona specifically, because the Arizona Wildcats, for instance, like they are getting better, right? Under Jed Fish. They're improving. There's no doubt, but they're still not a power, right? Arizona State is in rebuilding, obviously under Kenny Dillingham. There is an opportunity, I think, for Notre Dame at times to go into Arizona, which they've done now a couple times over the last couple of years, and to get some of that talent, right? To kind of rob that state of some of their higher end talent. And I think Cre's just another example of that, and a player that obviously they really wanted in this class.
So you mentioned a lot of different, the Swiss Army knife and a lot of different things that he does. And the highlights that I saw were, I think, mostly from his junior season when he was playing safety. What do you think is the best position fit for Cre Thomas when he gets to Notre Dame?
So when I first saw his film as a sophomore and even a little bit of his junior film, I was like, that kid is a field corner in Notre Dame's system that is going to play a whole lot of zone, because for a kid that is probably only 16 years old, maybe 17-year-old at this point, he has incredible spatial awareness. Like he sees the game so well. So a zone-based corner, a guy that gets his eyes forward, can read a quarterback, and really understands, as far as what route combinations you're trying to run against me, where the soft spots are in zone, and be able to collapse and find those and close those holes quickly. I think that he is a really good instinct for that. And then I saw his junior film of safety, though, and that kind of changed my opinion a little bit, Sean. Honestly, this is a young man where I think that he could end up being a really good safety on the next level, because he has all the corner tangibles that he can bring to the game. The short area quickness, the man-to-man cover ability, the zone instincts that I talked about. But then I'm talking to his coach that kind of reaffirmed this for me, Jason Jewell, the head coach over at Brophy. And he talked a lot about this kid's long. He's a long strider, and he's got incredible range. He was kind of comparing Benjamin Morrison and Cre Thomas, and he's like, Cre is much more of the rangy type, right? Like he can cover a lot more ground, opening his hips and kind of working, hash the sideline or to the middle of the field. And I honestly am kind of stuck on the notion of like, I think Cre might be a safety down the line, right? Like, and we've seen obviously Notre Dame have their struggles with safety recruiting. Now I think 2025 is going to be a much better class. I think it's actually going to end up being a great class of safety recruiting. But I wouldn't be surprised if Cre ends up as a safety, because I think that he brings a really nice versatility to the table where I can make him almost an interchangeable safety nickel. I can rotate him down, play some man-to-man coverage, work him to the middle of the field at times, play too high. I think the versatility is really nice, and I think that can really, kind of set him apart on the next level is to try to utilize that versatility as much as possible.
And I think that's Marcus Freeman was just talking about that within the last week or so, about not necessarily pigeonholing guys and just looking at, he's going to come here and he's going to play this, looking at guys who have sort of that, multiplicity, I guess, the versatility to their games going forward.
That's a big thing that Coach Freeman really kind of instilled in the Cincinnati program a little bit when he was there. He didn't look, and obviously this was a part of kind of the whole structure of the defense, but he looked as defensive backs, not as much about corner versus safety, field versus boundary. He looked at them as cover men that he could use in different spots. Like, that's why I think of, like, they had, I forget the one corner's name, but they had Ahmad Sauce Gardner, they had Kobe Bryant, but then they had another corner that ended up starting at outside corner this past year, but he was a nickel when those guys were both there, right?
Okay.
Because they had the ability to kind of put 3 corners on the field and not be as much of a designated outside corner nickel corner team, right? Like they were much more of a, we are going to just play man across the board. We're going to have a bunch of cornerback body types. Even Brian Cook, who now is playing with the Kansas City Chiefs, was a safety for Cincinnati, was a top 100 pick 2 years ago in the draft. He was a former cornerback as well that ultimately at Cincinnati ends up playing safety. So I think that when Marcus Freeman was in his heyday as a defensive coordinator at Cincinnati, he really just, I think, looked at defensive back a little bit more broadly as far as if you have coverage instincts, you have a good body type, you have length, I can find a spot for you on the field. So I think that might be where you're going as far as like more of an interchangeable feel to the position overall on the back end, more than just kind of labeling guys as a field corner, boundary corner, and a safety. It's a little bit more interchangeable, I think.
Interesting. And I mean, they've done a little bit better recruiting the safety position, but that is still an area that kind of needs to be addressed with some numbers anyway. So
yeah. And the good thing is that you're getting a guy like a Cre Thomas, who, again, starting as a corner, but could add to the safety depth eventually. But you're in a great spot, Sean, honestly. Like, you are in 2025 at both those positions. Notre Dame's in a great spot. So obviously you look at him as a corner first, right? And the number right now is Notre Dame would like to get to 3 corners in the 2025 class. And Notre Dame's in a great spot with multiple corners this year. Like, you're in a situation where Notre Dame might have to turn down a really good corner this year. They might have to. It's that good. But I think that the real cool part about Cre is that you might be able to make those numbers work if you do eventually see him as a safety, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you take 3 corners outside of him because he's kind of your flex guy. I think he gives you some flexibility for the number side of things. But you have guys on the board right now. Dallas Golden out of the state of Florida. You have guys like Devin Williams out of the state of Georgia. You have Mark Zachary out of Indiana. You have Kevin Humes out of Maryland. And Notre Dame feels pretty good about all those guys. Now, some varying degrees, a little bit more than the others. But for the most part, Notre Dame has a chance in this cornerback group to put together maybe its best class under Mike Mickens. Like, I think that's pretty safe to say. If you land a Dallas Golden and a Devin Williams in a hypothetical to go along with Cre Thomas, it's a home run cornerback opportunity for Notre Dame. It really is.
Yep. So what's the backstory to Cre Thomas? How'd all this happen for Notre Dame?
Well, I mean, like I said, he was a guy that Notre Dame was incredibly high on very early on in this process. Because he was actually on our podcast before. I had pre-recorded an episode like a couple months ago, and he had come on, and I'm planning to get him back on again. So, Sean, he's like one of those kids where you ever just like listen to a kid before he's committed to Notre Dame, and you're just like, yeah, that kid's going to go to Notre Dame. Like, there's no doubt about it, like just so well-spoken, so just pleasant and nice and articulate. And you just hear him talking. You're just like, that guy's legit, man. Like, that guy is a legitimately just good person.
Right.
Loves a high academic kid. He's a high 3, like 8 GPA type of kid as well. Like, he has the world in his fingertips, man. He really does. He can pretty much do whatever he wants, I think, in life. And you hear him talk and you're like, that one makes a lot of sense. And then you hear the Notre Dame side of things, as far as they love this kid, right? They love him. They think he's a tremendous player. He's a guy they're going to push for. And I think the key for me is that over the last few months, you mentioned a couple of schools that offered him, the Arizona schools, Oregon, Wisconsin. Really only Wisconsin was a school that I would say has a shot there, right? Like, they're the only ones. For whatever reason, Cre really liked Wisconsin. I think that he really, just kind of hit it off with the coaching staff, and they showed him a lot of love as well. But this one is pretty cut and dry. It felt for about 3 to 4 months here leading up to this, it wasn't a matter of if it would happen, it was just when it would happen, right? Like, that was the only missing piece here. Cre wanted to go on a visit, take his unofficials, because, again, when he talked to his coach, and it kind of gets reiterated, he wants to make sure that he made a really good decision, because Cre Thomas is not a kid that's going to decommit. He's just not one of those kids. He wanted to make one decision and make sure he was happy with it. And he visited twice in a 3-week stretch. He went to the USC game, and then he went to the Pitt game. No one even knew that he was going to go to the Pitt game as much. And that was kind of like a late decision, because what had happened, Sean, was he left the USC game and he's like, They're like, I think I'm done. Like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I have to see anymore. So he went back one more time to just reaffirm everything. He's like, okay, let's make sure one last time. This is where I want to be. He went to Pittsburgh.
Well, that, that's probably good too, because, you come once, maybe you get swept up and, whatever, and, you're feeling whatever emotion and stuff like that. Just come back and make sure that it's the real deal.
That's
it's
it, man.
A good idea if you can do
it. And it got cemented for him. No doubt about that. It was like, I think a day or two after he got back from the Pitt visit, he had called the staff, obviously, and gave him the verbal commitment at that point, right? So it felt like a foregone conclusion for a while. Wisconsin made it interesting, but ultimately Notre Dame was the place that I have for a long time thought that Cre Thomas was going to end up at, because he's the Notre Dame cliche, right? Like the guy that fits in every asset of being a Notre Dame student athlete. He's that kid, articulate, high academics. Literally the first thing I asked him, Sean, because I have an interview that's coming out with him, because I interviewed him before the commitment was made public. I asked him, why Notre Dame? Very generic question. First thing out of his mouth, which it usually is for Notre Dame kids. Oh, academics is very important to me. It's very important for me. I want to set myself up for the next life. And that was like kind of the sequence. It was academics, then it was networking, then it was football, right? And it's funny to say for a kid that, he's 6'1", long and can run, like he's probably going to get a shot at the NFL, right? Like he's most likely going to get a shot at the NFL. Despite that, very driven, high academic kid, comes from a great family. Just made so much sense, man. So it was a foregone conclusion for a while, but Cre Thomas being Irish should be a surprise to nobody.
All right. So this position continues to blossom under Mike Mickens these last few years. I mean, just look at what's on the roster right now and what's coming in these cycles. So what's next for the cornerback position?
Well, I hit on it a little bit earlier, so I can also hit on safety, because I think that these things are going to be kind of interrelated, especially with the numbers kind of fluctuating the way you want. But so Mike Mickens has now gone from getting Benjamin Morris and Jaden Mickey, right, to then getting. Then you got Christian Gray and Micah Bell, and we've seen a lot of Christian Gray this year. Now he's got Carson Hobbs and Leonard Moore in 2024. 2025, now with Cre Thomas aboard, like I said, I think that there's definite spot for 2, but depending on how you view Cre Thomas, there could be a spot for 3. It really depends on how he ultimately is viewed by the staff. As of now, he's viewed as a corner. So you're going to expect 2 more cornerbacks to join the 2025 class. The names that you need to know that I hit on a little bit earlier: Dallas Golden is a guy that Notre Dame is very high on. He's out of Berkeley Prep down there in Tampa Bay, Florida, the high school of Keon Keeley, which I knew is going to bring back some very negative memories to some Notre Dame fans. But Dallas Golden is very high on Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I think, is in a very good spot so far with Dallas Golden as they continue to maximize that recruitment. Then there's going to be guys that we've talked about. Mark Zachary is an in-state kid at Ben Davis in Indianapolis. You're going to talk about Devin Williams down at Buford in Georgia. You're going to talk about Kevin Humes out of the state of Maryland. That's kind of the short board of like the guys that are Notre Dame is very high on, and they also kind of reciprocate that interest, right? There's kind of mutual interest on both sides of things. So I really think if you get a Dallas Golden and then you get 1 of or 2 of Devin Williams, Mark Zachary, Kevin Humes, Notre Dame is going to pull together their best cornerback group in some time, and definitely the best under Coach Mickens. And I think that the great thing is that Coach Mickens, I think, has everyone's trust in the sense of whatever talent you're going to put in that room, he's going to make it better. Like there's no doubt about it. He's going to make it better. And if you get an elite class like they're pushing for in 2025, an elite class that I think they can get in 2025, and you're able to retain Mike Mickens for a couple years, Notre Dame's cornerback room is going to be fun. Like it's going to be a fantastic room. And I really think that overall, secondary recruiting in 2025 is off to a great start, but I think it all starts with obviously what Mike Mickens is doing in that cornerback room.
Well, and like you said, if you can retain him, I mean, he is going to start becoming an even hotter commodity. And it was just a few weeks ago where Marcus Freeman was talking about, he's ready to be a defensive coordinator, and there could be some dominoes that fall with all the speculation about what could happen to Al Golden. There were already head coaching opportunities. So it's like Mike Mickens needs to be a priority for Notre Dame. one way or another. This
he
is
has to
such
be.
an important position. Such an important position.
That's the coach right there for me, Sean, that no matter what it takes, you need to try to keep that guy around as long as possible, right? Because there's no questioning of if he's a great coach. We know he's a great coach. I mean, you don't do what you've done with guys like Cam Hart's. And I mean, even before that, I mean, he made a lot of solid players look a lot better than they were early on in his Notre Dame career. And then he gets very talented kids like Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison, and he maximizes them. And then you lose them for a game against Pitt. At least they're limited in the game against Pitt. And guys like Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey come in, both with interceptions and ball outs, right? And then now you're talking about the next step of a Cre Thomas, of a Carson Hobbs coming, Leonard Moore coming. And you just really get excited about the future of the cornerback position. So, yes, you are 100% correct. Whatever it takes, pay raise, whatever, keep Mike Mickens in South Bend as long as you possibly can.
Well, like Freeman was talking about when the discussion about Mickens came up when they were at Cincinnati together. It wasn't Marcus Freeman who was pounding the table for Sauce Gardner over there. It was Mike Mickens. And, again, a guy who, wasn't necessarily, thought of in elite status, but he obviously became elite being mentored, tutored by Mike Mickens. And look where he is now.
Sean, that's why recruiting is such a interesting field, right? It's like you look back at Ahmad Sauce Gardner's background and you're like, if Notre Dame signed a kid with that background, right? He was like a 2-star kid. If they signed that type of kid, Notre Dame fans would have lost their minds.
Oh, yeah, they'd
lose their minds.
They'd run them out of town. That's right.
And all due respect to Notre Dame fans here, because I am one of them, a lot of schools would have done that as well, right? Like Ohio State fans would have done that, Georgia fans, Alabama fans. But then you look at the end result, and yes, Ahmad Sauce Gardner is tall and long, and he's athletic, and he has some raw traits to work with. But you have to give a big part of the credit for, one, identifying him, but then helping to develop him for what Mike Mickens was able to do out down there in Cincinnati. So, yeah, man, he needs as much credit as he possibly can for that one, because he found a diamond in the rough. He found some coal and he turned it into a diamond, right? Like he did that and put a little pressure in there and he made it happen.
So Brandon has a question of you. He wants to know how serious a contender Notre Dame is for Kevin Humes. He says he knows we're in the top 5, but is he a take with Golden, Williams, and Zachary on the board?
He's reasonable. I mean, they're a contender, Brandon. They are. So I think for me, like, the reason that I would say it's a crowded board right now is because all the players that you just mentioned, Dallas Golden, Devin Williams, Mark Zachary, and Kevin Humes, Notre Dame's all in a good place with every one of them. Again, to varying degrees, but in a good place with all of them. I would say out of that group, if you get a Dallas Gold, let's say, and it's a Devin Williams, Mark Zachary, Kevin Humes, I think Notre Dame would have a hard time saying no to either any of those three to be that third cornerback in the class. I think that he is Notre Dame's a reasonable competitor for him. I would ultimately say that he's probably the least likely, though, of that board, in my opinion, to end up at Notre Dame. I just think that maybe they're slightly in a better spot with Mark Zachary, for instance, if we're using that comparison. But I think that they have a shot there if they push all the right buttons. I think that Mark Zachary likes Notre Dame a lot. He's been to Notre Dame twice already, which is obviously a good proof that there is interest there. So I think that he's a very reasonable person for Notre Dame to push for.
Are you expecting any more, not surprises, any activity here in the near future, I guess?
I would say it like this, Sean. I think that, like I said, Notre Dame's in a good spot with a lot of secondary players in 2025. And I think that Cre Thomas is potentially kickstarting some good momentum on the recruiting trail, right? So I do believe that Notre Dame will be able to potentially close on one or two guys by the end of the new year. I think that Notre Dame has the opportunity to do that. And, because like I said, Notre Dame's in a good spot with quite a few guys right now. I mean, we could take it obviously to cornerback, and I already talked about those guys, but Notre Dame's in a great spot with Ivan Taylor, the safety out of the state of Florida. They're in a good spot with Owen Strebig out of the offensive tackle out of Wisconsin. They are trending in great directions with quite a few guys on the board. So I think that Notre Dame has a chance to really ride this momentum and to continue the great start that they are in 2025.
Yep, it's going to be It's going to be interesting to see kind of the start of this off season and what happens with some different coaching moves and things like that, and kind of see, like you always, I think, kind of sit on the edge of your seat a little bit, what the impact is going to be. And I mean, it better than me because you've obviously covered it a lot closer. So
it's a turbulent world, man. It really is. Like, I feel like there's talking points and there's news that I hit on every single day. And then like in the next day, things just change so quickly. It's just such a volatile world, the world of recruiting. Anybody that's looking to get into it, I'm not sure I would recommend it for the faint of heart, I guess, is the best way to put how the recruiting world can be, man. It is hustle and bustle. It's volatile. It's crazy. I mean, it really is. Things move so quickly, so fast. I mean, I'm talking about a kid that I think Notre Dame's trending in a great direction, and then he changes his mind the next day, right? As far as like how those things typically trend. So recruiting is a wild, wild world right now.
So Tommy's got a question. He says, with the 20 cornerback class being over-recruited in terms of incoming talent for several years now, is that a position group we can expect to see transfers from?
So I believe the one Tommy's talking about is the Ryan Barnes, Chance Tucker, like that class. Tommy, I don't know. I mean, I'm not willing to speculate on transfers, honestly. Like, that's not something. I mean, anytime that you have a position group or players from position group that are getting passed over by younger kids, I mean, you're always in threat of that, right? I mean, you're in a transfer portal world where, I mean, things happen so fast. That's why I always say, like, for me, from my personal approach, Sean, I'd be like, I would always over recruits. I would always over recruit on, right, as far as continuing to push and keep ties with kids in the now class and the future classes, because numbers can change so quickly, man. It's just one or two transfers that kind of take you off guard, an injury that is a medical retirement. Like, things happen so quickly. So it happens, man. It really happens so fast.
Yep. All right, one more question before we let you move on and then bring in your favorite Steyers out of the bullpen. What are there any quarterbacks who you expect to hit the portal that you like for Notre Dame? This is kind of tough, I think. Isn't it?
I mean, like, Andrew, I've heard a couple names of guys that are going to enter. It's nobody like super high profile yet. It's more like some guys that are kind of like mid-tier guys, and maybe, a couple guys that I think could transfer potentially up to like Power 5. But there's nobody that I know of that's going to enter the portal that like move the needle for me yet. I would be open to a potential transfer, and I know obviously Notre Dame is open to a potential transfer. It's just of like the varying degree of like, are you pushing for a guy that's going to come in and potentially start for you? Or are you going to push for a guy that's more of just depth? Or are you going to push for a guy that's just going to come in and compete? What type of quarterback Notre Dame brings in is kind of wait and see type of situation right now. So, I mean, there's a couple guys that I think could potentially enter, but a lot of speculation out there right now, and there's not a lot of result. I will say this though, Sean, it's not the sexiest grad transfer quarterback class. I don't think it's going to be. I mean, like, just hearing some of the names that are potentially going to be on the market, it's definitely not, Caleb Williams 2 years ago, like that class. It's not, Jaden Daniels was in that class as well. Even last year, I mean, there were a couple guys that hit the portal that were super interesting. And then even like Drake May's name was floated out there as a guy that could potentially enter the portal this past year as well. I mean, I'm not hearing those types of names right now. It's more about guys transferring up to try to prove that, the competition level question marks, like right. We saw a kid, for example, out of FCS Holy Cross that entered the portal today, Matthew Sluka. That kid on the FCS level is one of the best dual threat quarterbacks on that level, probably the best dual threat quarterback on that level. He's transferring up to prove something, right? But going from Holy Cross to Notre Dame, like, that's a legitimately high jump, right?
That's
like
that's a leap.
It's pretty ridiculous. So nobody that's really popping to me yet, Andrew. As we have guys enter the portal, I'll give my thoughts on them. I'll see if there's guys that are interesting, but I haven't heard any names that like are thought provoking to me yet. The guys that are like no doubters, I would go after that guy.
All right. Sounds good. Good stuff. Ryan Roberts, Cre Thomas with the commitment earlier today. You can read all about it at irishbreakdown.com. So go check it out right now.
Yep. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you. I'm happy also to see my favorite Steyers on the show now. But Sean, always appreciate you too, man.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Have a good Thanksgiving.
I'll see you guys.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So Ryan checks out. Jesse checks in. How's your day today, Jesse? What this means is like good news for all the viewers and listeners, because it just means we've got an extended show going on. Like, you're going to get even more IB Nation sports talk than usual tonight. So enjoy. Good Monday.
I'm tired. It's a long Monday.
Well, you watched football. You went to a basketball game yesterday. Did you see Jokic do his thing?
Yeah, I watched. I went to a basketball game Friday night, Saturday night, Saturday just kind of hung out, and then tailgated with some Browns fans on Sunday, and then went to another basketball game in the evening. So it was a long weekend.
You sound like you had a long weekend.
Glad to be through work today. It was just like, it was one of those Mondays where you feel like you're watching paint dry. Time could only go so slow.
This is going to be a little bit of a short week in terms of, it's Thanksgiving, so there won't be a show on Thanksgiving. We will have IB Countdown to Kickoff later this week. I don't believe we have a show tomorrow. Brian will, but we will have a show on Wednesday. So, again, there's like a lot of stuff. There's a women's basketball game tomorrow. There's a women's basketball game on Friday. Of course, there's a football game on Saturday. So we've just got a lot of stuff going on right now. So Marcus Freeman, Monday press conference. We are just about at the end. We're going to get one more press conference with him next week, we found out today. It's not going to be like a live stream kind of thing, or it's going to be, like a Zoom just for the media. We're going to get to talk to him, but he shared his thoughts today coming out of the 45-7 win over Wake Forest that hopefully at least made some people happy, I guess. In terms of, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? It looks like I shorted myself one of the sound bites again. But they're hitting the road. They're hitting the road. I did find it interesting, because I know there were like a lot of people sort of freaking out about the defense. He started off talking about, look, we're defending this slow mesh. You're out there. You've got light boxes out there. You got to be prepared. You're going to give up some run plays here and there. And, it looked pretty bad for a couple series in the first half, but they really put the clamps down again. After that, they figured some things out. So I thought that was good from a defensive standpoint. And I mean, you can't fault giving up 7 points to Wake Forest, I don't think.
Yeah, like you kind of said, there was a few people who, not a few people, but like you listen to kind of like the audiences of people throughout the first half of that game. And yeah, Notre Dame started off slow in some areas, but I didn't feel like the defense was slow at all game. And going back to what your point was, Marcus Freeman basically made the comment, hey, like if you're going to play pass heavy, if you're going to play, more so to cheat the pass, that's what they're doing against Wake Forest. They don't care about the running game. That's just going to waste clock. If Wake Forest wants to run the whole game, that's not what's going to beat Notre Dame, right? And so I think that they played more towards, like you were saying, that slow mesh. It's going to keep those linebackers, that's the whole point of the slow mesh, is it prevents the linebackers from kind of free flowing at all times. But you have to be comfortable with giving up those 3, 4, 5 yard chunk plays. And when it mattered most, Notre Dame, clamped down on the defenses. As soon as it felt like they were getting, anywhere inside Notre Dame territory, or they got to a third and manageable, Notre Dame always seemed to find a way, to put their foot in the ground. And I think that's a mark of a good defense, of just being able to say, hey, we know you're going to get a few here and there, but as long as you don't break us for those big plays, we ultimately aren't too concerned.
Yeah, exactly. So they're back on the road this week to finish out the regular season. They are 2-2 on the road. And Marcus Freeman asked, like, hey, how can you sort of, how can you redirect things on the road? What are you going to do?
Obviously, 2 of our 3 losses have been on the road. You look at Clemson game.
Not sure what happened there. Let's try this. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to try this one more time. That obviously did not sound very good. Did it sound good to you at your end? No, it did not. So let's see what we got here.
Obviously, 2 of our 3 losses have been on the road. You look at Clemson game. I looked at Clemson game Louisville game.
Oh boy. Well, we're off to a great technology start. I think that the biggest thing to me, like what he talked about was starting slow. They got behind Clemson 7-0. No, they got behind Louisville 7-0. They got behind Clemson 7-3. Slow starts is what he talked about. And he talked about, the need to start a little bit quicker. I think, though, really what those two games came down to was turnovers, because the Notre Dame has turned the ball over 13 times all season. 8 of them came in those two games combined, of course, with a whopping 5 against Louisville. That, to me, was the biggest difference in those games, was the turnovers. You just have to be better protecting the football. You can't be a team that protects the ball so well at home, but then you go on the road and all of a sudden you're a turnover machine.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of what you were talking about. I think you've lost the turnover battle in these important road games, and you've also just got out to some slow starts offensively. But if you ask Marcus Freeman, I'm sure he would say that the turnovers are more detrimental than kind of starting slow, just because Notre Dame has a good enough defense that their offense doesn't have to be perfect all of the time. It's just they can't turn the ball over and give, some teams some free points, et cetera, when the offense might be, struggling a little bit. So I do think that both of them are factors, and that that's kind of what I saw against Wake Forest too, was again kind of a slower, methodical start. And I think that's got to be an underlying issue that Marcus Freeman continues to look at, is what is he going to do to have his teams better prepared from the start of the game?
All right. So I was just kind of checking off the air these other sound bites, and something there must have been like a bad bit rate in the audio today, because they all sound the same, even though on my computer, when I edited them, I listened to them all the way through and they sounded fine. But for some reason, the processing did not come out very well. So I'm not going to be able to play any of the Marcus Freeman sound bites. One of the things that he talked about, though, for this week is tweaking the practice schedule. Like, they are going to change things up a little bit. Like, they're going to start with some more competitive periods. Like, they're going to play some what they call good versus good, the ones versus the ones early in practice, to kind of get those competitive juices going a little bit, to sort of like ramp things up for the game this weekend. So you're going to have more first team versus first team type stuff during the week to try to get them prepared for Saturday. What do you think about that aspect?
Yeah, I think that it is intuitive of Marcus Freeman to try something new, because it seems as if, a common denominator for a lot of these games has been some slower starts. And when you're going on the road, and that Michigan, and like he led with it, there's a Legends Trophy on the line. This game obviously is still meaningful to Stanford. It's going to be their senior day, et cetera. Like, there's still a lot of moving parts in this game. And so Notre Dame has to take it seriously, just like they would take any other game. But they have to find a way to come out sharp and play sharp the entirety of the game. And like you were saying, it starts, or at least to Marcus Freeman, he thinks it starts at practice. And the usual format of practice is individual periods and then kind of group. Usually like linebackers with defensive line will work on stuff, and then linebackers might go work on 7-on-7 with the secondary. And then at some point you'll all get to team stuff. But rather than kind of doing team maybe, 45 minutes, an hour into practice, they want to start with that right away to kind of simulate a game. Like, you don't just ease into a game in individual periods or group periods or whatever it might be. Getting straight into some of these competitive periods at the beginning of practice could potentially, in Marcus Freeman's eyes, translate to better starts of the game.
Well, and I think especially during Thanksgiving week, which obviously is, you're still a college football team. Like, the rest of the student body might go away for Thanksgiving, but if you're on the football team, you're going to be around. But it is Thanksgiving, and so your schedule is going to vary a little bit. What they have typically done in the past is the team gets together, they have their big Thanksgiving meal, and then they get on the buses and they're all blah, and they, fly out with their bellies full of Thanksgiving dinner to get out there to California for this final game, because of course they always go to California for the final game of the season. But they're going to do it a little bit differently this year. There's going to be some practice on Thursday, and they're going to still do their team Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday, but they're going to wait until Friday to head out there rather than go out a full extra day early. What do you think about that?
I don't love that, because it's already, to me, it already felt weird enough traveling, on a bus to some, because we played in closer schools, so we never flew. We were busing everywhere, but it always felt weird busing to places even the Friday night before a game and relatively close, destinations. I can't imagine switching different time zones and that sort of stuff all the day before a game, and then getting up the next day and playing. And maybe that's the thing is that they don't want to allow for adjustment at all. Like, it's just like, let's just shock the body and go straight into it. I don't know, but to me, it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, especially with, like, to me, it's like, why wouldn't you potentially look at flying out Wednesday evening, getting there Thursday, having a light walkthrough type practice, having a good Thanksgiving that day, coming back together on Friday for another practice, and then playing on Saturday. I liked like getting there too early than too late, almost, especially when, like you said, there's not a lot going on the back end of the week with Thanksgiving, so you could get really established. I don't know. It feels just kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, and I know that the women's basketball team, we're going to Ball State for a Friday game. They're going to play Friday at 5:00. They are traveling on Thanksgiving on Thursday. They're busing down. They're not traveling multiple time zones like you're talking about, but still, they're going to do their Thanksgiving dinner Wednesday, I think after practice Wednesday night, and then they're getting on the bus on Thursday and heading down Thursday on Thanksgiving, and then getting down there for the game. And I could see what you're saying, like go down an extra day early, and then, you get down there and you still do your Thanksgiving stuff on time, and, light walk through or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how much difference this is going to make. It is a longer trip, but it is also a program that is used to traveling more than most everyone else in the country, because, until next year anyway, when half of the West Coast joins the Big Ten and everyone's traveling back and forth across the country. But, again, right now anyway, Notre Dame is at least used to the travel. So I tend to agree, get there earlier rather than later, but I think that they're trying to keep, kind of the weekly routine and not get too far out of it, even though that hasn't necessarily done them well this season, because the fact that they are 2-2 on the road, the weekly routine that they had. But they're trying to bust out of that by the more competition periods and stuff like that during the week. I really wanted to play the soundbite that he had about the communication issues that they had. Almost unforgivable to spike the ball in a 2-minute drill, and then before you snap the ball for the next play, you've got to burn the only timeout that you have remaining. And Marcus Freeman said it came down to like a wristband issue for Sam Hartman, and he said that they've had that before, which again, it's like, well, if you've had it before, then
how's it not
fixed? Like, need to make sure that it's fixed at that point, because that was, the way the game played out, it obviously was not crucial. But this is really one of the few 2-minute drills that they've run in a couple of months. It was like they were running them, every game at the start of the season. This is the first time they've had that, and it completely disrupts things. And fortunately, they were able to at least settle for the field goal out of it. But what if it had been worse than that? And like, you really needed that timeout.
Yeah, I would say that, again, of looking at kind of season-long issues, the slow starts obviously comes to mind. And then they really operated some good 2-minute drills early in the season. And then they got afraid. And I feel like their timidness is what led to now some of these kind of errors of when they're getting back into the 2-minute drill, because they were very successful, but some reason got spooked about running it in certain moments and not feeling like there's enough time, or not wanting to give, the other team the ball right before the half, a potentially, a momentum swayer. I think that plays into it when you don't trust your 2-minute drill, through that middle portion of the season. And now you're coming back to it. You see kind of some of these errors that are, popping up. And to me, it's just a really not good look because like you said, they still settle with points, but in a game like potentially, Ohio State, Louisville, Clemson, some of these losses, those 4 points are very meaningful in a lot of respects. So it's just really unfortunate to see that they had that kind of error pop up. It feels like a very rookie mistake, I guess is what I'm saying. And we were in game 11. Like you shouldn't have to burn your timeout right after spiking the ball.
Yeah, the spook comment came up a couple of weeks ago after the pick 6 against Clemson, and it just feels like the way some things have been called and run, from the quarterback through the offensive coordinator and the head coach, that there's just a lot of spooked. Like they've played things a lot more conservatively than you ever would have thought they would, especially the way Sam Hartman started the season. But with a quarterback of that experience and everything that he's got, Hartman has seemed really, to me, it's like since Louisville, Hartman has seemed a lot more gun shy to me.
I think his wide receivers kind of hung him out to dry a little bit.
No, that's true too. And that is definitely part of it. Between the fact that your most experienced veteran receiver, Jaden Thomas, has been hurt for almost 2 months now with, he's still slowed up by the hamstring that he suffered, remember, before the Duke game. And that was at the end of September. Like it still kind of has a little bit of feel like it was just yesterday. But when he's been as banged up as he had and as young and talented, Chris Tyree is still a first-year wide receiver. And those other guys are all based, even Tobias Merriweather is basically a freshman. You would expect Tobias, there's every reason to expect Tobias was going to produce more than he has this year. But those other guys are all freshmen. And Notre Dame doesn't, look at the past that we had. Notre Dame doesn't lean on freshman wide receivers, but that is who he has had out there. And so I think you're right. I think that does play into it as well. Even with a veteran quarterback like that, I do think that those young, inexperienced wide receivers have had some impact on that. But you could also say, maybe the way they're being coached has had some impact on that. And that's something that needs to be looked at the end of the season.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
All right. Well, again, unfortunately, we're not able to play some of this Marcus Freeman audio that we had from the press conference today because we've got some audio issues. I'll have to see if I can get that fixed, and maybe we can still roll with some of them on Wednesday. I will have to see. I'm not sure what the issue is. We've never had this issue before, so it's a little concerning / disappointing, but we'll see if we can get it rectified within the next couple days. But in the meantime, Jess, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's go, baby.
Okay, so Notre Dame's extended its NBC TV contract through 2029, 6-year contract extension. The financial figures not in the release, or it's going to run for 6 more years anyway, not a 6-year extension. But financial figures were not in the release the school issued before Saturday's game. But according to Front Office Sports, it's for an estimated $50 million a year. So what do you think?
I think we spent a lot of time deliberating about, what would potentially happen, what the money might be, who's courting who's, holding out. I think at the end of the day, we all knew a deal was going to be done. I think we all knew a deal that would be advantageous to both sides. Notre Dame obviously was going to get its money. To me, it felt like more of a kind of a piece in a chess match where Notre Dame kind of got things set up before the next incoming, because remember Schwarbrick is leaving. Some of these kind of higher.
Remember, he's not related to Kyle Schwarber.
These higher officials at Notre Dame are leaving, and so I felt like this was more of kind of, like I don't know, like not an accounting move, but like a clerical, like just like the next piece to kind of keep this thing going. Essentially, like I was never in doubt that it wasn't going to get done. I just had when it was going to get done, and again, I think it was done strategically. Right before the last home game, and then setting things up for the future.
Stymie says kicking the can down the road. A lot of people, Andrew, thanks for the super chat. It's weird Notre Dame is not disclosing the dollars in the TV deal. I wonder if the dollars is based on viewership numbers or something about leaving the ACC agreement. I don't think that it has anything, to do with the ACC agreement. It's, for whatever reason, they didn't disclose them. And I had this conversation with somebody else today. It's literally the only thing that anyone cares about. Like, you can say you're renewing it. You could say you're renewing for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. All anybody cares about is what the numbers are. And again, Front Office Sports is reporting that it's $50 million. You add on to that, according to tax returns from last year, Notre Dame got about $17 million from the ACC deal. So that takes you to $67 million annually right there. And that's going to go up a little bit because they were able to bump that up a little bit with the additions of these, some of these new schools. And you also throw in the fact that they still get a little bit more from their other TV games that don't include ACC partners and stuff like that. So you're going to be up around $70 million a year, which is very competitive considering it is 6 home games that you're talking about. And obviously if the Shamrock series is in the mix, then, so like you're not talking about a full schedule. And from an NBC standpoint, I think, a lot of people are talking about playing more Big Ten teams in the future and things like that. And I think that that's probably, going to happen. But, like as of right now, NBC gets some added value because USC is moving to the Big Ten. So that's both home and away. Notre Dame, NBC is going to have the potential every year to carry the Notre Dame USC game, whether it's in October for a home game or on the road, when it's out there in Los Angeles. And you also, like Fox is part of that deal as well. But what's going on this weekend? Fox is going to have the Big Ten game between Ohio State and Michigan. So like when they're drafting those games, that gives NBC the chance to have that primetime game, Notre Dame USC at night. Wisconsin, Michigan State, Purdue, they're all coming up on the schedule in the near future, like within the length of this contract. So that is nothing but good for NBC. There's a lot of extra value because they're going to get the opportunity to have both Notre Dame home games and get them on their air when Notre Dame goes on the road to some of these other Big Ten schools. So the last contract was 10 years. This one is 5 years. And I do think that it gives both sides kind of the chance to continue to reevaluate the numbers and the ratings at the end of 5 years and kind of see where they are. So I think this is if the numbers are accurate, which I don't think there's any reason to believe that they're not accurate, but $50 million is more than double what you were getting before. And again, when you add it with what they're getting from the other TV contracts that they're a part of, you're right around $70 million a year. So that is very competitive. It's a very good deal. Of course, you already see, people who are the anti-Notre Dame people coming in and immediately talking about, they need to be in a conference and put them in a conference and they'd be doing this and that. For those people, I've said this before, what problem does that solve for Notre Dame? There's as long as Notre Dame has this TV contract and they continue to have access to the playoff, which they're going to have more of starting next year with a 12-team field, there's absolutely no reason for Notre Dame to be in a contract as long as they can continue to schedule, outside their ACC agreement. And I think that they're going to be able to. Trying to see if there were any other questions that were popping up in the meantime. I don't think so. But I do find it curious that, like the Big Ten had no problem talking about how much money they were going to get from their TV contract. I do find it curious that literally the most important thing, really the biggest piece of information that anyone wanted to know in this was not part of the release, the money. Everyone wanted to see the money. It's not there. And from what I understand, we will probably never officially know it. We will probably never officially get it from either Notre Dame or NBC, in a release type fashion. You're going to have to go back a year afterwards and, look at tax returns like is being reported, or, rely on the other media reports that are coming out. And we'll be hearing some of that, I'm sure, as time goes by. So, Jesse, what is more significant, Eli Raridan catching his first career touchdown pass, or Rico Flores Jr. having the first 100-yard game of the season for a Fighting Irish wide receiver?
Yeah, I think this one was pretty easy, and it's definitely Rico Flores Jr. having the first 100-yard receiving game of the season for an Irish wide receiver. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's the first one since Kevin Austin. I can't remember what season that was in, so don't hold me to that. But the only reason I say that it's more important for Rico Flores is I think wide receiver production has been the not so shining spot on this roster for the last 2 seasons. And it feels like no matter who the tight end is, it's just like a plug and go. They're always going to be productive. They're always going to catch the ball. Someone's always going to have, at least a touchdown or a couple big plays throughout the game, whether that was Mayer, Evans, Holden Stays, now Eli Raridan. Like, there's always a tight end that steps in and has production. I think going forward, if the offense wants to have, more legitimacy and more firepower, you need more of those 100-yard type games out of your wide receiver. So I have to go with Rico's performance is more impressive.
Yeah, it's not what's more impressive, it's more significant. Yeah, and I completely agree. It had been nearly 2 full years since the last 100-yard game for a Fighting Irish wide receiver. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary on New Year's. Remember, Lorenzo Styles was the last 100-yard receiving game. So they had gone nearly 2 full regular seasons without one. And the fact that it ended up being Rico Flores, one of the freshmen, was one of the ones who were finally able to do it, I think just bodes very well for the future. And you look at what the group of wide receivers did, it was the best overall game for the group of wide receivers from a reception and yardage standpoint as well. And most of it we're talking about, like Jaden Greathouse was in that mix as well. And that's really what you need going forward, is for those guys to be the ones to step up. And like Eli Raridan was going to get it at some point, and he finally got on the board as well. And you would expect that he was going to get it with Mitchell Evans out. But this is kind of what we've been waiting for from this group of wide receivers, and we finally got to see it. And we can finally sort of dismiss that, well, they still haven't had a 100-yard game by a Notre Dame receiver. Well, that is off the books now. And I think that we're going to continue to see more of that from this core group of freshmen next year as they continue to grow their roles and grow into what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise that, the wide receiver production and the correlation between what I would say was Sam Hartman's best performance of the season, like those things are going hand in hand, right? And so while it's unfortunate that it took us to see, until game 11 to see this, you would hope that we would have caught, a little bit of this earlier in the season. But again, I guess it's what I'm getting at is it's no coincidence because I thought Sam Hartman played his best game of the season.
Right. Okay. Speaking of Sam Hartman, hopefully keep your fingers crossed. This is video. It's not audio like I was trying to play with Marcus Freeman. Here is Sam Hartman after Saturday, his last game at Notre Dame Stadium. All right. So Sam Hartman, little
that was all I needed to see.
You think that was it? Like he was getting the full wearing the uniform as long as possible for the last time kind of thing.
Yeah. I think he's definitely leaning towards one side, but I think that him wearing the pads still I think it was him knowing that probably he's leaning one way to the other. And I don't think he's committed 100%, but I think he knows which way he's leaning. And again, that was enough for me, because once you take those pads off, that's the thing. It's like the last time you're going to take them off at Notre Dame.
DK makes a good point. Like, I don't know. Estime won't come out of games, and they're leaving him out there, obviously, so that he can cross a statistical threshold. It got him up over 1,100 yards. There have been times where they've kept him in late in games longer than they probably really needed to, so that he could go out there and get some extra yards and that kind of stuff. But it's really just personal choice, whatever he decides to do. And one, he's got to declare for the draft first. Two, he's then at that point he's got a decision to make. Brendan says Cam Hart should definitely sit. I mean, that makes the most sense to me, as he says, with his injury history. That would make the most sense to me. Absolutely. There was a question earlier from Carberry Q. Anything to it about the seniors that didn't participate in senior day maybe coming back? So I asked specifically about Xavier Watts today, and said, hey, is there anything that we can read into that? And Marcus Freeman said, well, he's a junior, so there's no reason for him to go out there and be honored. Well, from an eligibility standpoint, he's a junior, but this is his fourth year here, so he's a senior. So yeah, he still has eligibility remaining. And, the way Freeman tried to frame it was, it's an NFL decision, but, he said he's a junior. Again, he's technically a senior. Academically, he's a senior. And that's what Notre Dame has always fallen back on, is what you are academically, not what you are from an athletic eligibility standpoint. So I guess it's still wait and see. We'll find out about that. So somebody says he's graduating. Are we still talking about Xavier Watts, or, I'm not sure exactly who we're talking about. So, but, I think maybe here after this week, we probably will start to see on social media some guys make those announcements. It'll be probably a matter of when, not if. Within the first week, we'll start to find out exactly who's declaring, who's coming back, who's not, all that different stuff. So Joe says Watts is graduate. I mean, I would assume he's, we don't get their academic reports. I mean, Notre Dame has these guys on track to get their degrees in 3 years. So he might actually have his degree at this point. I would assume he's going to be graduating, because like if you don't keep that track, that's when you start, you fall behind and you get suspended, or, maybe you get ushered to another school. So I would think that if he doesn't already have his degree, he is at least on track to get that. Should be. Fill in the blank. It's blank, kind of on the other end of the spectrum from Sam Hartman. And by the way, we didn't touch, more on the other Sam Hartman stuff, but Sam Hartman is absolutely like the poster child of the guy you would like to have as the front man playing quarterback for your program, high profile, and like you said, I think you said he would have liked to have been a Notre Dame lifer. Could you imagine, though, with the recruiting ranking that he had coming out of high school, if Notre Dame had signed him out of high school,
yeah, right,
what people would be thinking, and the odds that he would probably still be here at this point would be a little slim. He's just, kind of the outside, worked his way back and, worked back in. But, again, Sam Hartman has touched just all different facets, both in and outside of the program, with the things that he does off the field, going to hospitals, visiting kids, sick kids, all different kinds of stuff, along with his head coach, Sam Hartman. That's just the kind of guy that you want as the front man of your program. You wish that there were more of those guys around. So fill in the blank. It's blank that Caleb Williams opted not to speak to the media after Saturday's loss to UCLA in what was likely his last home game at USC.
I like what you did with this question stack. It's incredibly lame that Caleb Williams opted, or sorry, it was, I'm not even going to say lame. It's incredibly childish that Caleb Williams opted not to speak to the media after the UCLA loss And ultimately,
you don't have to repeat the question back to me, right?
Ultimately, USC's last home game of the season. But it's not surprising because we saw Lincoln Riley do this last year. And when your head coach sets a bad example, you as a player think that you can, do the same thing. I'm high profile Caleb Williams. I lost another game. I'm not going to go out there and talk to the media. I've said it before, no matter win, loss, I've even advocated that umpires and referees need to be spoken to after games. You're just accountable.
They need to be spoken to.
Yeah. You just need to be accountable, right? Like just as much as you want to be interviewed after a big win, you have to have that same mentality after a big loss. And I know it's not always that easy, but again, the people's job in the media, reporters, is to get an account for what happened in the game that you necessarily don't get to see. Only the player playing gets to see. And so you want that inside perspective. You want to see, what's going on inside that player's mind, why he made this decision, why he didn't make this decision. And so it's really not fair of Caleb Williams to not come out there and paint that picture, for the reporters and journalists and everyone out there trying to just, have a good grasp of what they're going to talk about and how to spin kind of this game. So again, it's just incredibly childish. But the example was set by his head coach. So we really shouldn't be surprised.
No, and that's where it starts. It starts with the head coach. And we've talked about this before. Some of the stuff that Lincoln Riley has done out there, trying to ban different media members, and taking away their credentials and doing all this stuff. Look, you can only control your narrative so far. And in college, it is fair. You don't have to come out and talk to the media, but you would think that the head coach would have a chat with Caleb Williams at some point and say, you should probably just do this once. And look at Sam Hartman a couple of weeks ago after the Clemson game. Didn't have a great game. Threw a pick six, threw a couple interceptions. What did he do? He came out and he talked with the media and he faced the music. He manned up and he came out and he owned up to it. And that's, again, that's the kind of thing that you appreciate from a person like Sam Hartman, is that he will come out and he will own it. He's willing to take it upon himself. And he's standing up there and answering the questions, even though he didn't have to. At any point, he could have said, no, I don't want to, and not come out just like Caleb Williams did. And it's like, you're in the second biggest media market in the country, playing for really probably the third most high profile team program in the city after the Lakers and the LA Dodgers. USC football is really, third behind those two organizations. You've got to come out and you've got to face it. You won the Heisman Trophy last year. You are in Wendy's commercials right now.
Yeah.
You've got no problem taking all that NIL money that's coming your way and taking those paychecks, but you're not going to come out and answer a couple of questions with the media after you've had a couple of bad games. It's a terribly bad look. And by the way, when you get to the NFL, if you're a rookie starting, he's going to be a rookie starting in the NFL, but you're going to be in the NFL at some point. And guess what? The NFL requires players to go stand out there and answer questions. You don't have the choice of running away from the cameras and the microphone once you get to the NFL. You're going to have to do it. And now would be a good time to start learning that lesson, I would think.
Well, it's just really unfortunate because, all bias aside, I obviously don't like USC, but I still respect Caleb Williams and the quarterback that he is. It's got to be unattractive to NFL executives of when you're looking for a guy, when you're looking for a player who's going to be the face of your franchise, who you are rolling the dice on with your pick because you've been so bad, right? And so now not only are the fans relying on you to get this pick right, and not only are, is the organization, because your job is to come in and be the Band-Aid and to turn things around of being, this quote unquote generational quarterback. Well, I got news for you, Caleb Williams. If you've had bad games in college, you're going to have bad games in the NFL. The talent gap shrinks. It's a lot harder to be successful in the NFL. You're probably going to be less successful than you were in college. So things are only going to get harder. You're going to throw more picks. You're going to have more bad days. And if you can't face it in the college level, what makes it, how does that prove to these NFL executives that you can do it, at the NFL level, when not only are you supposed to be playing good games, but you're supposed to be the face of the franchise. You're supposed to be the guy that, again, is the Band-Aid and brings these organizations out of this pit, essentially.
Yep, exactly. Carberry says Williams not mature enough for the NFL. And I mean, he's pretty much showing that every day right now that he's not mature enough. I'd get run out of here by T-Guns, Tommy, if I didn't say he wants to know if you'd like to attend an elite high school football semifinal game this Friday in Columbus.
I will be back in Indiana. It is Thanksgiving, have some days off from work and enjoy the family time. And there's I might be in Muncie, Indiana that day where the real action is at.
I was gonna say, I think he's coming to Muncie with me. Not too far from Columbus, though, really. Right?
No, considerably, no.
All things considered, yeah. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Notre Dame announced Muffet McGraw's statue will be unveiled before the Irish women host Purdue on December 17th. They're going to unveil the statue outside Purcell Pavilion.
It's about damn time Muffet McGraw got her statue because, I know the greatness of Muffet McGraw. I was around the Notre Dame women's basketball program a good amount growing up. But then when you start pulling up the stats, it's like even crazier. I mean, she had 848 career wins, 77 winning percentage, and 81 winning percentage. 81 winning percentage. 81% in conference play. You got 2 national championships. You have 4-time AP Coach of the Year, 3-time Naismith Coach of the Year. She's already in the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. I mean, you could argue.
And the Naismith Hall of Fame. The Naismith Hall of Fame.
In the Naismith Hall of Fame.
The big one.
You can argue that she is probably, not even probably, of our lifetimes, one of the most successful, college coaches out there, slash Notre Dame in general, one of the greatest, coaches in Notre Dame history. And so, again, it's about damn time that this statue is being unveiled. What else did Muffet need to do?
Pretty much nothing. Jack Swarbrick announced, I believe it's going on 2 years ago now, when they had the big ceremony for Muffet, that there was a statue that was coming. And here it is. We're 2 years later, and it's coming. And it's fitting because Notre Dame and Purdue haven't played for several years.
Is that Purdue, who they beat in the national championship?
That's who they beat in the 2001 national championship game. So they're going to do it before they play Purdue on December 17th. That's
poetic justice. That was her first one.
There aren't too many people, in the actual Purdue women's program who were around back then. There are probably some people in the athletic department, but trust me, like when we used to still play Purdue, when they would play Purdue every year and we'd go down there, especially like you sat in the stands at some of those Notre Dame Purdue games, I think down there, like those Purdue people are still bitter, very bitter about that national championship game because they don't think Ruth Riley was fouled on the 2 free throws at the end of the game that ended up winning the national championship for the Fighting Irish. But as for Muffet, like you ran through the resume, there's not much more I could say. Very well deserved. Finally you're talking about a Naismith Hall of Famer and a 2-time national champion. You can count, I think on one hand, maybe 1.5, the number of women's basketball coaches who have won multiple national championships, and she's one of them. And like you've got all these football statues up around campus. Purcell Pavilion's been there for a long time now. It's time that the coach who brought home the hardware twice is going to have her statue. I'm curious to see what the statue is going to look like. Like,
which one is it going to be?
Is it going to be Muffet down, in the trademark crouch that she had with the high heels,
with the heels.
And the skirt? Like, is that what it's going to be? I say it needs to be her crouching down, and you need a player with 00 and the sweatband standing on one side of her. That would be Ruth Riley. And you need, the player with the jump shot in the other. That would be Arike Agumbawale on the other to represent the 2 national championships. That is my image of the Muffet McGraw statue.
What do you think? Let me ask you this, though. Do you think it needed Muffet pre-approval? Like, do you think that they came to her with separate kind of like concepts or were like,
They
Which
might
way are you
have.
feeling here? Or do you think
Good
it's going to
question.
be a complete surprise?
That's a good question.
I
That's
think a good
really
thing about
question.
Muffet too is like when you start looking into like I don't know, I just felt that Muffet was really like that homegrown kind of, she built the program herself and took Notre Dame to new heights and essentially. And along the way, I felt like at least, she was always so nice. That was like very approachable, very easy to talk to. Like I remember talking to Muffet growing up and stuff, and it was like, who has time for like a 5 or 6 year old potentially running around? But she was always so
Yeah,
nice.
little twerp.
That was the cool thing is she's just a really nice person with a lot of humility to her.
Yeah, and that's one thing about that program, I think, and like that legacy still continues in the program right now. Of course, you've had Niel, who played for her and coached under her and everything else, and I think you still see a lot of that. So it's great. So we can all go out there and freeze on December 17th and see that statue.
I guess that makes up for the
Congratulations,
fact
Muffet.
that you can't go to Buffalo and Cowboys that day, but
Oh, is that is the same day, isn't
yep,
it?
yep.
I didn't think about that.
I can't
Didn't
find
even think about
anyone to
that.
go with me, so I think I'm not going as well.
How about the other big news from the weekend? Jimmy Johnson going into the Cowboys Ring of Honor.
Yeah, and so did you see why they picked the time and place to do it? Because apparently it was like the last. This is at least what I've read. It was the last guaranteed Cowboys broadcast on Fox for the remainder of the season. They know Jimmy Johnson works for Fox, and so they basically wanted to let Jimmy get his moment kind of on Fox with basically it being announced and televised kind of everywhere because it felt weird. Like, why are we doing this at a Panthers game on the road, 1:00 on November the 19th? And it was really funny because before I found out, I saw Jimmy Johnson sitting next to Jerry Jones in the box. And I was like, what is going on right now? Why are these two don't sit next to each other? I was like,
and it was a
did
very
hell
awkward
freeze over? Like, what is
They
going
had them
on?
both on TV, and it was a very awkward, kind of thing that they were doing. And I also don't always I don't like, especially once basketball starts, I don't get to watch any of the Fox pregame, and even before basketball, I don't always watch the pregame shows, but I actually had it on when they had Jerry and Jimmy on live. So it was pretty cool. And I realize, Notre Dame connection, a lot of people hate Jimmy Johnson. That's fine. Dallas Cowboys people hate Jimmy Johnson as well. You've got double the reason to hate him. But the guy could coach, and the guy knew players, and so I think it's great that he's finally getting his due. Great football mind, regardless of what you think of him. All right, well, that is going to do it for tonight. We will wrap it up. A lot of good stuff tonight, starting with the Cre Thomas commitment, the cornerback from Notre Dame. It's Tommy's not taking no for an answer. He might just drive over to Muncie and abduct you. No, Andrew, I'm not saying Dallas people hate him. I'm saying people who hate Dallas hate him, hate the Cowboys, hate him. So.
I was gonna say you don't want to open this can of worms. You could go on a good discussion about your thoughts about Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones and the mistake that was made.
Yes, exactly. All right, well, hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe, rate, and review. Appreciate you being here tonight, and we will be back. Yes, DK, there will be a Wednesday show. We will have a Wednesday show. I don't think there is going to be one tomorrow because I've got the Notre Dame women's basketball game, and I think that there's a Vince conflict. Let's put it that way, because there's always a freaking Vince conflict. Okay,
I'm here.
Jesse's here tonight. That's right. And Jesse is driving back from Cleveland to South Bend tomorrow, so
we'll take a staff day.
Huh?
So we'll just take a staff off day tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll both be in the same house, different rooms Wednesday when we do the show. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. We will talk to you then. Hit the like button, subscribe, rate, review. IB Nation Sports Talk.